Hello again, gentlemen. We are looking at Dijkstra's Notes on Structured Programming, and today we start with Chapter 1 on our inability to do much. I am faced with a basic problem of presentation, says Dijkstra. What I am really concerned about is the composition of large programs, the text of which may be, say, of the same size as the whole text of this booklet. Also, I have to include examples to illustrate the various techniques. For practical reasons, the demonstration programs must be small, many times smaller than the life-size programs I have in mind. My basic problem is that precisely this difference in scale is one of the major sources of our difficulties in programming. So what Dijkstra is getting at here is, it's a general problem in the sciences and in engineering, that the toy examples you have to play around with when you're being educated and when authors write books don't actually reflect the problems you'll deal with in the field. So this is a tension for the pedagogue that Dijkstra is wrestling with. How can he show us how to manage complexity in large programs when he can't really present a large program because of the nature of the medium? It would be very nice, he continues, if I could illustrate the various techniques with small demonstration programs and could conclude with ... and when faced with a program 1,000 times as large, you compose it in the same way. This common educational device, however, would be self-defeating, as one of my central themes will be that any two things that differ in some respect by a factor of already 100 or more are utterly incomparable. History has shown that this truth is very hard to believe. Apparently, we are too much trained to disregard differences in scale. We treat them as gradual differences that are not essential. We tell ourselves that what we can do once, we can also do twice, and by induction we fool ourselves into believing that we can do it as many times as needed. But this is just not true. A factor of 1,000 is already far beyond our powers of imagination. And this is generally the principle that you have quantitative and qualitative differences. And what Dijkstra is saying essentially here is whenever you have a quantitative difference that is more than an order of magnitude, but he actually talks about 100 times or 1,000 times, so 2 or 3 orders of magnitude, it is a qualitative difference. That the sheer vastness of the orders of magnitude that you are adding changes the quality of what it is you're dealing with. Let me give you 2 examples to wrap this in. A 1-year-old child will crawl on all fours with a speed of, say, 1 mile per hour, but a speed of 1,000 miles per hour is that of a supersonic jet. Considered as objects with moving ability, the child and the jet are incomparable, for whatever one can do the other cannot, and vice versa. Also, one can close one's eyes and imagine how it feels to be standing in an open place, a prairie or a seashore, while far away a big, rainless horse is approaching at a gallop. One can see it approaching and passing. To do the same with a phalanx of 1,000 of these big beasts is mentally impossible. Your heart would miss a number of beats by pure panic, if you could. To complicate matters still further, problems of size do not only cause me problems of presentation, but they lie at the heart of the subject. Widespread underestimation of the specific difficulties of size seems one of the major underlying causes of the current software failure. To all this, I can see only one answer. Viz is short for, I can't remember. This is a Latin short form, but good to Google it. Viz short form. Is it videlicet? That is to say, which means, videlicet. That is, to this I can only see one answer, viz. To treat problems of size as explicitly as possible. Hence the title of this section, the title being On Our Inability to Do Much. And this actually also gets back to one of the major problems in computer science education. If you think about the medical sciences and think about how doctors tend to be trained, there's a very close association between practicing doctors and the doctors who train other doctors. It's not as though you have a large separation. And in fact, that's why the term doctor, physician, doctor means teacher. Doctor is a Latin term. The original, if we look at the origin of the phrase, doctor means teacher because it's from dokeo, which is to teach. And so the physician tends to be a teacher of physicians, and that's why we in our society we've joined the two, because we see the importance of physiology and physic health. We see that it's so core that we can't afford to have a separation between theory and practice in the medical sciences. Sadly, when it comes to engineering, we have a very vast gap between practitioners and teachers. So often you find that the person teaching an introductory course in programming has never spent, a decade in the industry building real software, maintaining real systems. So he has no sense for how the principles he's speaking about generalize. It's all guesswork. He's just gone through academia, ticked a few boxes, gotten his doctorate, and began teaching. But he's never built software at scale. So he has no capacity to teach how to build software at scale. Returning to Dijkstra, however, to start with, we have the size of the computation, i.e. the amount of information and the number of operations involved in it. It is essential that this size is large, for if it were really small, it would be easier not to use the computer at all and to do it by hand. The automatic computer owes its... And let me pause on this phrase because it's very interesting. Computer was a human being who did manual computations. And so initially, when what we call computers were invented, they were known as automatic computers. And this kind of helps us just get a sense of how people were thinking 50 years ago. The automatic computer owes its right to exist, its usefulness, precisely to its ability to perform large computations where we humans cannot. We want the computer to do what we could never do ourselves, and the power of present-day machinery is such that even small computations are by their very size already far beyond the powers of our unaided imagination. Dijkstra continues, yet we must organize the computations in such a way that our limited powers are sufficient to guarantee that the computation will establish the desired effect. So there's a tension here, that we're dealing with machinery that is powerful beyond our imagination, but we have to organize what it's doing. This organizing includes the composition of the program, and here we are faced with the next problem of size, namely the length of the program text, and we should give this problem also explicit recognition. We should remain aware of the fact that the extent to which we can read or write a text is very much dependent on its size. In my country, the entries in the telephone directory are grouped by town or village, and within each group the subscribers are listed by name in alphabetical order. I myself live in a small village, and given a telephone number, I have only to scan a few columns to find out to whom the telephone number belongs, but to do the same in a large city would be a major data processing task. It is in the same mood that I should like to draw the reader's attention to the fact that quote-unquote clarity has pronounced quantitative aspects, a fact many mathematicians, curiously enough, seem to be unaware of. A theorem stating the validity of a conclusion, when 10 pages full of conditions are satisfied, is hardly a convenient tool, as all conditions have to be verified whenever the theorem is appealed to. And to just make this a bit practical, let's consider size of the Linux kernel. And this is very unfair because we all know the Linux kernel is a very, very good piece of software, but it says 40 million lines of code. Now, or if we take a smaller tool, let's take size of Clang in lines of code. How big is Clang? Clang is about 5 million lines of code. And what does this mean? This means that if we want to be confident that Clang is correct, now of course this refers to the whole thing, all its libraries, but basically there's a massive code base that has to be studied for anyone to be competently making statements or assertions about it. So there's all these opportunities for things to go wrong. In Euclidean geometry, Pythagoras' theorem holds for any 3 points A, B, and C, such that through A and C a straight line can be drawn orthogonal to a straight line through B and C. How many mathematicians appreciate that the theorem remains applicable when some or all of the points A, B, and C coincide? Yet this seems largely responsible for the convenience with which Pythagoras' theorem can be used. Summarizing, as a slow-witted human being, I have a very small head, and I had better learn to live with it and to respect my limitations and give them full credit rather than to try to ignore them, for the latter vain effort will be punished by failure. So what can we take away in summary from this chapter? Dijkstra is saying that programming is very difficult, and one of the core difficulties in programming is how much we have to deal with the power of the machines we're building on. We have to organize a series of computations on these machines. And the longer our code bases are, and the more material we try to base our reasoning on, the more difficult this becomes. So the tool is one of managing complexity. We're trying to figure out how can we reliably write software that our minds are able to grasp, and we want to approach programming in a way that Dijkstra calls humble, and that's why he later writes this Turing Award paper, The Humble Programmer. So the fundamental lesson here is we want to approach programming humbly, recognizing that we have to treat ourselves as limited. We can't approach this as though we can handle unlimited and arbitrary levels of complexity.